Thank you very much. And thank you very much indeed to ODI for organizing this session and for allowing me to be here with you, launching the World Social Protection Report 2014-15. Let me check how this works, like that. Okay, so I'm going to start by the main conclusions of the report, and then the rest is going to be a taster, because there is no time to explain in detail, what it emerged from all the global data that we have. So the report presents a state of the art of where are we in social protection, and it presents the organization of social security systems in about 192 countries, explaining coverage, benefits, expenditures, and so it's a very comprehensive source of social protection statistics. It follows a life cycle approach, so it presents social protection for children, for women and men in working age, and then later in older age. It finds generally that about 27% of the world population has adequate access, so very clearly more investments are needed in social protection. And then it closes with an analysis of main policy trends in recent years, and here we find two divergent trends. We have a number of countries, particularly middle-income countries, that have expanded social protection boldly. This is really an explosion of cash transfers in these countries. And on the other hand, we have a number of countries, including higher income economies, but not only, that are contracting social protection as part of the fiscal consolidation policies. And finally, the report makes an important call on why social protection is essential for the post-2015 agenda. In these moments, is essential for crisis recovery, inclusive development, and social justice. So let me walk you through the report. This is an interesting graph. What we did here, it was looking at the number of countries and how were they expanding social protection schemes as part of the social protection systems. And the first graph that you have there, the first map of the world, is almost all in white, meaning very few countries, this is in 1900s, very few countries had well-developed social protection systems. The last map you see, which is in quite intense color, this is currently, and it shows how many countries keep advancing, expanding the social security systems. So what is interesting to see is an old idea, and it keeps developing, and is part of the development story. And I mean that because a lot of the social protection audience has focused only on cash transfers, small cash transfers, and not seeing them as systems. The fact is that they belong to systems, and when you see it, developing historically, you get this sense of being part of development. Now, what we have with social protection is that it is a human right with very strong demonstrated developmental results. We know that it reduces poverty and inequality, it reduces hunger and malnutrition. In children, it has very demonstrated results in better education and health outcomes, increases productivity of workers, and supports population that they are not able to work, like persons with disabilities and many others. But very importantly, and what we put through the report all the time, is that this also contributes to growth. And is this the economic stabilizing function that it has? And nowadays we have all these discussions on inequality. The reality is that inequality is economically inefficient and dysfunctional. Consumption is concentrated really in the top elites in most countries, and what we do need is to raise household income so actually they can consume and support domestic demand. And that's why a number of developing countries are expanding social protection in a big manner. For instance, China. China has nearly achieved nearly universal pension coverage in very few years, and is increasing wages. And this was a story unheard only 10 years ago. So this is a very important point for social protection. And additionally, also very important for many of us, social protection builds political stability. And as we know, poverty and gross inequalities tend to generate social conflict. So the document follows a life cycle approach, which is actually what governments, employers, and unions approved in ILO Recommendation 202 on social protection floors in 2012. So it starts by children, social protection for children and families, and follows for women and men and working age. It goes on old age pensions and care, and then it goes to healthcare. And it does put attention towards the importance of universal social protection, and this is combining contributory and non-contributory systems. So that is a lot of social protection discussions. I was talking, it was about cash transfers only, but actually it's very important to focus our attention as well in the contributory schemes that are part of the formal sector. And it's the interaction of both that actually does generate, universal systems. So let's start by social protection for children and families. And here there are lots of maps and graphs, and we don't have the time to go through them. So it's just a taster for you to look at the report and then, spend time looking at the graphs. And here I'm going to focus on this one. We get a similar graph in all the different schemes. And what we have done here is seeing how systems work. And what you see again is this fact. You see that some schemes are contributory, some schemes are non-contributory. And of the whole countries that we have information for schemes for children and families, which is 108 countries, the majority of them, 59%, do have a mix of contributory and non-contributory systems. And 75 countries, which is not a small number either, 41%, have simply cash transfers as part of some, social assistance. But these ones are not, enshrined by law, and they are not part of a social security system as the others are. So generally you will get similar patterns in other schemes with a larger predominance always of schemes included in national legislation as part of a social security system. Here you have coverage, and I'm going to pass that, and expenditures, and here I want to put a bit of attention on that, because here what you have in the dark bars is the number of population, how children represent in number of population, and the lighter bar is how are expenditures in social protection for children. And as you see, the numbers do not match whatsoever the population. In countries of Africa, children represent as much as 42% of the whole population of Africa, and only 0.2% of GDP is used on cash transfers for children. So there is a lot of space there from a developmental point of view to expand that. In social protection for men and women on working age, we have a number of schemes from unemployment, maternity, disability, and work injury, and we put them here together. There are more expenditures for people of this working age on this age group than that as children. And I'm going to pass them quickly because each of them, assuming I can, this is again will be the how a system perspective will be from unemployment protection schemes. Now here in the unemployment case is a very powerful one, because only 12% of unemployed workers worldwide are receiving unemployment benefits. So it shows that the schemes, they do have a capacity to be expanded, and ideally you want to expand them at the times of growth, okay? So that in countries that are having it, it is the right moment. I'm going to pass those because this is again how disability benefits are structured. Maternity benefits, we get that only 28% of women in employment do receive maternity cash transfers or some type of benefit. And here, the developmental impact of that is so positive. I don't need to tell you that there are all the arguments to keep expanding that type of scheme. And if we go to social protection for older persons, here how it will look again, the scheme. So you're seeing the logic of the report, how it works. So about 93% of all countries that we surveyed, which is 166 altogether, having pensions for older persons. So 93 of them, actually, they do have a mix of contributory and non-contributory systems. And only 12 countries actually had just cash transfers alone, without being part of a system as a social assistance. So it shows again the importance of thinking systems and combining both the contributory and the non-contributory aspects. Here's the mix of how contributory and non-contributory blend. The dark bars being the contributory systems, which we know they are more extensive than actually the non-contributory. And here are the public expenditures again. And here the numbers are less extreme, of course, than in children, given that there are much lesser number of older persons. And however, the expenditures are more are stronger. Altogether, we found that about half of the world older persons receive a pension. Now, this is the glass half empty or the glass half full. It depends how you want to look at it. The positive side of it is that this has been a very recent expansion. So that is the very positive, and it needs to continue. And we can very clearly see, in a few years more that we will think of a world very easily where all older person will have a pension. Now, the key thing of that is not just the coverage. In this case, and here's this graph, what it shows, all the dots that are on top of the middle bar, it shows that they have been expanding coverage. So as you can see, most countries are expanding, and just a few countries were contracting. But the key thing, however, is the benefits here. So though we see a positive trend on expansion of pensions, the problem is how high are the benefits, and in many cases the benefits are very, very low. So this is another area that we need to work. So it's not just the expansion of coverage, it's also the adequacy of the benefit. And because of fiscal consolidation, when we analyze the trends in Europe, we see that pensioners in at least 14 European countries are going to receive lower pensions in a few years, in a few decades, as a result of the pension benefit, adjustments that they are being done. So it's nothing to ignore. Another important trend on pensions, and this is a remarkable one, is the reversals of pensions privatizations. And you might be aware that in the 1980s and 90s, about 23 countries reformed or privatized their pension systems, and with the idea that was going to expand coverage, pension systems be more efficient, and also be less costly. Actually, none of that happened. Coverage was not increased at all. It had high administrative cost. The risk was transferred to pensioners, and the transition cost the governments had to pay to companies were so high. In Chile, it was about 5% of GDP. That actually left governments with a very high debt. So now there is a reversal trend. Many countries are nationalizing fully or partially their pension systems. So we have so far 3 countries in Eastern Europe, Poland, Hungary, and Kazakhstan, that to one or another degree have turned back. And in Latin America, Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, which the Bachelet government has just announced a pension commission. More could be explained here, but in Latin America, really the evidence is all positive. Coverage has increased in the 3 Latin American countries. Benefits have increased, and the administrative cost decreased. So, but more needs to be researched here, and it's a very important topic to keep exploring. On universal health coverage, and we have another full chapter, we have that still 39% of the world population is not under any health protection scheme, and the numbers are very large when we consider how important health matters are. And I don't need to talk about Ebola and others that are hitting the headlines. And I'm, here we will expand on many of the graphs here, and unfortunately I have to go fast, but let you know that a very important topic we raise is the global shortage of health workers. And now a lot of aid has often gone, thank you, to have often worked on how systems and how basic health works, but there is very much need to invest in health workers, and we estimate that about globally 10 million more health workers, skilled workers, are needed. That will include from nurses to doctors. And finally, to conclude, I would like to synthesize the policy trends. And here, as mentioned, there are 2 completely opposite trends. This is very interesting times we're living. On the one hand, we have a number, particularly of middle-income countries, that are expanding social protection boldly, but boldly. And on the other hand, you have a number of countries, not only high income, also a very significant number of developing countries that are contracting expenditures and contracting their welfare systems. Now, in the first phase of the crisis, which was 2008 and 2009, where we had, it was fiscal stimulus plans. And in a study we did on estimating in about 50 countries, we estimate that about 25% of all fiscal stimulus plans was invested in social protection. So globally at the time, despite the negative impacts of the crisis in terms of employment, populations were more or less protected because of the use of a significant amount of the fiscal stimulus plans. But the problem appears in 2010. And since 2010, what you have is a drive of countries to work towards fiscal consolidation policies, normally known as austerity policies. Now, 2010, this is using IMF fiscal trends contained in the World Economic Outlook. And in 2010, you got already 100 countries. And here what you have, the two bars signify, the lighter bar means higher income economies, and the darker bar means developing countries. And the very interesting thing is that we get all these discussions on all the press attention on fiscal consolidation on European countries mostly, but this is not the case. Actually, the majority of countries are developing countries, where this is not even in the news. That is number of countries cutting expenditures year on year. So in 2014, according to the wheel of the IMF, of the data that we produced the report, 122 countries were contracting public expenditures, of which 40 were high income and 82 developing countries, and the trend is expected to increase in 2015. Now you'll say, yes, they might be cutting, but perhaps not a lot. Well, unfortunately, some of the amounts are very large, and about a fifth of all countries are undergoing excessive contraction, and we define that as going expenditures below pre-crisis levels. So you have that as the crisis level, so then the crisis comes. So going below the pre-crisis levels. And of course, for development, this is a very important thing. Because some of the countries that are contracting as much actually have enormous developmental needs. And let me put some examples here. Eritrea, and I cannot read the writing so much. Sudan, Iraq, Bhutan, Guinea-Bissau, Yemen, and many others. So actually it's a severe situation that these countries are facing at a time that populations are in dire need. And what are the adjustment measures? For that, we reviewed 314, nothing less, IMF reports. And we found that the majority of countries are actually removing subsidies. A number of very important, 98 countries, as many as 98 countries, are considering cuts or caps on the wage bill. That means the civil servants, including health and education workers. So that has an impact on clearly on the health, education, and other social services they're going to deliver. 94 countries are increasing consumption taxes. 86 countries, of which 47 are developing countries, are considering pension reforms. And a number of them, and this is very interesting when you read IMF reports, they immediately advise in this moment of contraction to target social expenditures to the poorest. But that puts a lot of issues on the table because this is a time where whole populations are in need of support, not just the poor. And if we look at the impact of these fiscal consolidation measures with the aggregated impacts of low employment and that in Europe, we see that poverty is affecting at the moment 123 million of the European population. This is a quarter of all European population. So the numbers, the impacts of fiscal consolidation in a time of recession are nothing to be, taken lightly. So altogether, it's producing a kind of deflationary spiral in which you see households are having lesser income, so there is lesser demand, so people are less productive, so they access less, social services, etc. So instead of that, what the report suggests is actually to increase investments. Investments in social protection as part of investing in people. And for that, we pick the examples of Brazil, China, and a number of other middle-income countries where officially they are trying to increase household income as part of a developmental policy to raise national demand, to increase productivity, to raise education and health standards, etc., with the overall issue of, having mobilizing growth and private sector and all the others. And even in countries that are contracting, and this comes from a few weeks ago, this is South African Minister of Finance, Nene, and he vows to actually protect the poor even at a time that the country might be going fiscal consolidation. So he's going to sustain, and some other countries are expanding as well, social protection programs, precisely because this is the moment that populations need them. And in the report, we present a number of countries like Iceland and others, which are actually might be undergoing fiscal consolidation, but they're actually expanding social protection. Okay, on the expansion, which is the beautiful story, what we have is this explosion of cash transfers, and really an explosion. You have it of all types, from child and family benefit, household minimum income support, cash for work, maternity protection, social pensions. So, many of them. That is a reason why actually all countries, employers and unions approved recommendation 202 on social protection floors, which has been further endorsed by the G20 at the United Nations. So we at ILO are putting a lot of emphasis on expanding social protection systems and floors as part of it. We do have a discussion about the affordability of social protection, of universal social protection, and we're going to pass that, but this is how much will it cost a universal pension in a number of developing countries, and generally it's about 1% of GDP, and if you remove actually the contributory ones, it's even lower. And just to conclude, the key thing is that actually there is fiscal space for social protection even in the poorest countries. And now, because we are facing a number of orthodox policies, they are looking at the easier way to cut, which is, social sectors, and asking populations to get the cost of adjustment. The reality is that even the poorest countries will have one of these 7 options, which are reallocating public expenditures, for instance, the subsidies. And we know fuel subsidies are being removed in a number of countries, so this is a great opportunity actually to build social protection systems, not just small cash transfers, but systems. Increasing tax revenues, and not just the consumption ones, but other, expanding the tax revenue pool, increasing contributions of social security, fighting illicit financial flows, and we have, even the IMF nowadays is talking about that, and that will include from money laundering to tax evasion to trade mispricing and others. Lobbying for increased aid, tapping into fiscal and foreign exchange reserves, restructuring debt, and taking a more accommodative macroeconomic framework. Now, you have examples of all that. I'm just going to go into this one, and it's about the subsidies. Now, what happens is that many countries are removing the fuel subsidies, and as mentioned, this is a great opportunity. So these fuel subsidies very often were benefiting mostly, some electric company or something, so they may be regressive. Welfare impacts vary depending on countries. And then the typical formula is to replace them by a very well-targeted safety net. Now, say that this is an opportunity to do more than a very well-targeted safety net. And why? Because in a way, we are punishing middle classes. Now, fuel subsidies do make transport costs generally cheaper, and that has, an impact through all households, no matter, the income level they have. And you have to think in most developing countries, middle classes are very, very low income. So actually they are very vulnerable. So if you remove a universal subsidy and replace it only by a very well targeted safety net to the bottom poorest, the reality is that you are leaving more vulnerable all these middle classes that are there that are very low income. So that's why we could use this opportunity to build social protection systems that are comprehensive, not just very well targeted safety nets. And we do have examples from others, and no time to go into them, perhaps in the discussion, but let me say that there are very creative ways to do things, and let me pick an example, Mongolia. Mongolia is financing a universal child benefit from a tax on copper exports. So there are, lots of possibilities there to expand social protection, and I'm going to pass all those, and perhaps for the discussion. But how a country will do it, and this is a few examples that we put in the report. Normally a country will pick a few of these areas of fiscal space and try to play with them a bit, carve a little bit of space from all of them. So in that way you can build your social protection system. So it's overall a positive news that comes from developing countries in that front. So for all that, thank you. And for more information, you have the report with graphs and all that. And I hope that has piqued your attention.